Hi, Karl Sakas here, agency consultant, and welcome to Agency Office Hours for April 2022. We have a theme this month. Our theme coming up is around employee engagement and employee culture. How do you create a space so that employees can be doing the things you want them to do rather than the things you don't, but also they're enjoying it along the way? We'll be focusing on at least 5 topics today. Here's a preview of the questions we'll be covering today. First, Zach in Omaha has a question about agency structure. Specifically, what are the impacts on things like team culture and retention in different agency formats? For instance, remote, hybrid, and in person. We'll talk about that. Then Emily in Austin has a question about succession planning. Specifically, what to do if you have an employee who is interested in buying in to become a part owner of your agency. Third, we have a conversation with Jon Morris from today's event sponsor, Ramsay Innovations, specifically talking about what your agency needs to do from a financial standpoint to help you grow, based on Jon's experience growing his own agency previously from 1 to 200 people and then selling it. Good stuff. Then Farzana in London has a question around remote culture. Specifically, how do you ensure that remote work helps culture rather than hurts it? And finally, for today, Michelle in Michigan has a question about employee engagement and incentives, specifically how to think about bonuses, commissions, and other employee incentives to help get more of the right behaviors and less of the non-ideal behaviors. If you are one of the people I mentioned, be ready to unmute yourself for your Q&A conversation. If I didn't mention your name, but you'd like to ask a question in a future event, include that when you RSVP. My colleague Kate is sharing the RSVP link in chat. If you're joining live or if you're watching the video, it'll be in the description. As usual, we are recording office hours, so don't share anything out loud that you wouldn't want to become public. And if you're joining us live, you'll get the recording within 24 hours. If you're already watching the recording, well, you have it instantly. So here we are. Well, our first question today is from Zach in Omaha around agency structure. Zach, if you want to unmute yourself and come on video, welcome to Agency Office Hours from Sakas & Company.
Thanks, glad to be here.
So to paraphrase, you had asked, and then let's dig in on your question. You had asked, how are culture, retention, and quality of work affected by agency work structure? That is, remote, in-person, hybrid. If you could, please elaborate a bit about your question.
Yeah, so I'm at a smaller agency. We just added our 4th full-time person, including myself and my partner this week.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we have a part-time designer and then a handful of contractors, but we have a lot of growth happening. And so we're doing a lot of hiring. And my partner and I keep coming back to this conversation. He's very much just like, remote, who cares? Let's just hire anybody wherever they are, doesn't matter. And I am very much like, okay, if we want to build something here, and a lot of the people we're hiring, this is their first professional career. So it feels like, that's a big part of how I learned how to do what I do, is like being in the same room with people who were really good at it. And not that I'm really good at it, but anyway, yeah,
we're all trying, we're all working on it.
Yes, exactly. But just having the newer people on our team around us while we're having those larger strategy conversations, just helping them grow. And so we keep coming back to this conversation, and we keep just, right now we're at a hybrid environment. We do Tuesday through Thursday in the office, Monday and Friday work from home, and it seems to do pretty well. But I'm just curious, I've looked and I haven't found much that says much around, like, I just have a suspicion that remote people are not don't have much loyalty to a company that they don't maybe feel as connected to. So is retention an issue? And then quality of work, I don't know, I've been remote at other companies, and I know I worked maybe not as hard as I would have if I was in an office around the people around my coworkers. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts or have seen what you've seen as far as the differences in structures, how it affects them.
There are several things going on here. So let's take a look at those. And by the way, for everyone who is listening live, please share on chat. What have you noticed about differences in remote versus hybrid versus in-person teams, whether your own or your experience in the past? Ultimately, the agency format that is right for you, and this is true for you, Zach, and for everyone listening, is a mix between what do you want and what does your ideal team want. If you, for instance, want to be 100% in person and no one around you wants to be 100% in person, well, you've got a disconnect. Or everyone in your industry focus wants to be remote and you want to be remote, great, that's a match. Or there's the hybrid component. One of the big things on remote versus in-person and hybrid as well, right, where you're in person a portion of the week, anywhere from 1 to 4 days a week. And certainly, Zach, your experience about having the 3 days in the middle, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, makes sense in doing the hybrid format because people have flexibility at the end of the week and the beginning of the week. But you're there together and you're in it together in the middle. That's a good way to do it, rather than letting everyone randomly pick their mix of days, because otherwise then you end up having a hybrid structure where the people in the office are on Zoom because not everyone's there anyway, things like that. It is also worth considering when it comes to preferences. There's a joke in economic development. There are site selection consultants. This is if a company is thinking of moving its headquarters or other facilities. And the joke is that the site selection consultant considers many different factors, but it's funny, the headquarters almost always tends to move to where the CEO wants to live. Funny how that works out. Ultimately, remote teams can be highly productive, highly cohesive. Some of my clients are like that. I'd say I had that with my own team. Where we have a team retreat coming up in a couple of weeks, but otherwise we're doing the work remotely. When you have highly motivated people who have a clear picture of where they need to go and how they fit in, it can work really well. On the other hand, if you've got a team of people who aren't as productive in the office, it's going to get worse remotely. I had a client several years ago where one of their team members, they had some concerns about him and they decided to hire him anyway. That was a mistake. He was so unproductive that they put this guy's desk outside the agency owner's office so that the owner could look out the door and see, is this guy working? Now, he had quit soon before they hired me as a consultant. I would have recommended firing him. If your team is filled with people like that, it isn't going to matter what the format is. Part of it is being aware and making sure your team's aware of the values, goals, and resources to follow VGR. If they understand values on how to operate, goals, and where to go, and resources in terms of time, money, people, software, so on to get it done, they can make better decisions along the way. From what you've seen so far, what have you noticed that is different, good, bad, neutral, on Mondays and Fridays versus Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday?
We worked from home yesterday and we always do a team meeting in the morning, but then, 6 hours later in the afternoon, we've got this person who just started last week. And it's like, well, this is day 6 for her. And she hasn't talked to anyone on our team since this morning, which is, that's a whole, we have somebody who's on vacation. And so it's a whole different thing.
Okay.
So it's
okay.
We have it set up. So it's, but so I just find that we just moved into an office in mid-December, and I feel like we've made so much more progress in our connections with each other and in building what we want this agency to be since we've been in person, that I just feel like, I don't know. I'm just curious what everyone else's experiences is. And I know I've asked a lot of people about how they feel about remote. Like, I'm in a marketing Facebook group and I asked people about it, and they're just like, if anyone required me to spend half a day in the office every week, I would quit immediately. It feels like there's a very strong anti-remote or anti-in-person approach. And I just feel like, I don't know, it feels short-sighted. And I just want to make sure that we're making the right decisions for building an agency that will be here 10 years from now.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing is, there's no one right answer, right? You have to find what works for you and your team. Being in Omaha, you're in a large enough metro area that having an in-person requirement, whether it's fully in-person or hybrid, works, right? If you're in a more remote, physically, geographically remote area, there aren't going to be that many people in commuting distance. Like the case of the past client where the guy was so terrible kind of thing, their town was 20,000 people. There weren't that many people within commuting distance, and so they made a compromise. They have since shifted to have some more remote team members. Taking a look at what people are sharing in chat, John mentioned it's harder to mentor more junior team members without face-to-face, for sure. That is true. There's a question Molly mentioned about how do you encourage working in person if you have team members out of state? I've been at agencies in the past that had that mix where we had some people who were full-time remote while most others were in the office. Usually that was a case where they'd been an employee for several years. They moved elsewhere, usually due to a spouse or partner's work change, and they were good enough that it was worth it to continue. If you have someone who is based elsewhere and you're going to have them work remotely all the time while other people are in the office, some or most of the time, definitely consider having a residency where you are paying for lodging for that new soon-to-be remote team member to be in person for like a month or at least a couple weeks. Maybe it's a couple weeks, then they're remote, and then you bring them back again for a longer period than just a day or two. Kind of thing. That's something to consider. Karen raised an important point about rapid pace of client changes. If you're going to be remote or mostly remote, you need to nail down the communications policies and protocols and methods. For instance, at one of the agencies where I was working as a project manager, one of our internal rules was that if someone IM'd or DM'd or otherwise chatted you something, and you didn't respond, it was up to the sender. The onus was on them to follow up until they got the answer they needed. It was not on the recipient. That was helpful, where at one point, I was having chats with like 5 different people, knowing that, I would do my best to get through things, but they were going to follow up with me if there's something they still needed. Michelle mentioned remote Monday, in person Tuesday to Friday, a lot lost in communication. For sure, thinking about my book, Made to Lead, about managing marketing creative teams, it's easy to be a bad manager. It's really hard to be a good one. And to this particular topic, it's relatively easy or straightforward to be a manager when everyone's in person. It is a lot harder if people are remote or hybrid. And so part of the answer for what's the right format for you is, and this is true for you, Zach, and for everyone who's listening, how do you feel about managing people? I have had some clients over the years out of over 400 agencies who hate managing people so much that basically they've questioned, should they even run an agency? And then often I'll counsel them on moving toward becoming a consultant rather than running an agency. So there's a lot going on. But before we shift to Emily's question, Zach, what would you say are your next steps as you sort through this?
Right now, I think we've kind of settled on our hybrid approach, but we have a couple internships that we just put up, and I don't know how realistic it is to expect interns to be in person. So just because they're current college students.
In person in terms of commuting to the office or?
Well, yeah, I don't know. This will be our first experience with internships, so maybe I don't really understand internships, but just like, will they have a few hours in the middle of the day between classes, and does it make sense for them to drive out to our office for just those few hours or just work from their apartment?
And some of that may depend on their course schedule. If they have like Tuesday, Thursday classes, maybe they're Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or vice versa, or that kind of thing. So for anyone who has worked with interns, please share your experience in chat, including your advice for Zach. That would be helpful. Well, Zach, thank you so much for joining, and I would love to hear how things unfold.
All right. Thanks, Karl.
So next up is Emily. Emily, I know you have a question related to team succession. And I know you have the other call coming up shortly, so we'll do the rapid fire approach here. So to paraphrase, Emily, your question was this: how should we approach when a current employee is interested in becoming a partial owner of the agency? If you could share a bit more about your question.
Yeah, and I should back up and say she is a 1099 employee, but she's been a long time 1099 employee, very loyal. I would say 90% of her work is done with us, with MedVoice PR. And so, and there's a certain area of the agency where I feel like she would be ideal in running it and potentially eventually owning it, so I can take a step back from it. And so I guess my question is, well, a couple, I'm assuming there's a few options that you can do in terms of buying in. And does it make a difference if she's a 1099 employee versus a full-time employee? And don't feel like you have to rush, by the way. I can be a little late on my
okay,
call.
good to know.
Okay.
So in terms of her current status as a team member, that shouldn't really make a difference. You know, I'm not a lawyer, but I mean, ultimately, if someone is buying in, a random person could buy in. A random person could buy up, 9% plus of, Twitter stock, and suddenly now have, controlling interest in the company, kind of thing. Like there's not really, a blockage there. And also, of course, public versus private companies different. So I don't believe that would make an impact, but you'll want to talk to an attorney to double check. The fact that you've worked with this individual before is really helpful. Like, about how long have you worked together previously?
About 4 years. And then before that, she was internal at one of our clients. So really, I've worked with her for about 8 years. So I know her work ethic very well, and her thoroughness and her loyalty, all those things.
So too often people are thinking of bringing in a business partner that they don't know very well. But here's the thing: a business partner, like equity partner in your business, you're basically getting business married. Would you get business married, or non-business married, after talking to someone a couple times or knowing them for a couple months? Probably not. That tends not to go very well. Certainly some people do. So the fact that you've ultimately known her for 8 years is really good. And for everyone who's listening, if you're thinking of bringing someone in, have you had an opportunity to see the person at their best and at their worst? Ideally, hopefully seeing some at their worst, because you're eventually going to have some difficult situations, whether it's some sort of a client downturn, an issue with an employee, an issue about, what about the future of the business, including if you need to put in a cash infusion to deal with the situation. How are they going to handle things? Are they going to run away? Are they going to stab you in the back, or maybe stab you in the front? Or are they going to be working with you through difficult situations? So, it sounds like you've got a good impression, Emily, for your specific situation. One of the core things to think about, and you've already mentioned around your goal is to be able to step back yourself. Some people are interested in bringing in partial owners as sort of a motivational thing. And we may talk more about this later with Michelle around employee incentives. For sometimes it's, how do you keep people to stay? It's sort of a golden handcuff situation, but you're not necessarily expecting them to become the full owner. In that case, doing something like phantom stock, which is basically a synthetic form of equity that you can make do different things, kind of thing, that can be a helpful way if the goal is to keep people hooked on staying with the business, but maybe you're planning to have a big exit in the future where you want to stay legally the primary owner, but you want to give them some upside in some way. So phantom stock doesn't sound like quite the right choice here, though you want to talk to an attorney. For instance, Matchstick Legal focuses on agencies, as does Sharon Turek. So, may make sense to dig in on that. But, in this case, if the goal is to sell so that eventually they either become the full owner or someone else joins them, as the full owner, phantom stock probably isn't the right solution. A lawyer can say for sure. But here's the thing. Someone can be a great employee or a great contractor or a great small P business partner, right? Like maybe it's another firm that you've worked with over the years. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have an owner mindset. If you think about owner versus employee mindset, and some of this ties back to our conversation with Zach earlier about people working remotely or in person or what have you. Just because someone is a great employee doesn't mean they're going to be a great owner. A client ran into this several years ago where someone had been a great employee for, it was like 6 to 8 years or so. And the thing is, as soon as they became an owner, unfortunately, they kept thinking like an employee, right? They weren't thinking about the greater good of the business, and that ultimately, as an owner, your job is to keep the business going. There may be a point where it makes sense to shut things down, but in general, your job is to operate as a going concern. And if people have things they'd like to share in chat about their experience bringing in a partner or sorting things out with a partner, please go ahead and share that. Ultimately, I guess related to the owner versus employee mindset, basically, do they know what they're getting into? For instance, there's a situation in the TV show Mad Men. Not that Mad Men is like reality, but there's a point where I think after they lost the Lucky Strike account, all of the partners needed to put a cash infusion into the business. And Pete Campbell was a new junior partner, and he didn't have the money. I think it was like $50,000, which I think with the conversion would be like he needed to put in $500,000. Do your team members have $500,000 if it came to that? Now, most people are running smaller agencies than the various Mad Men iterations, but I would dig into and chat with them about their financial situation. For instance, a client has, as part of a long-term succession plan, a team member who will be buying in to eventually become the full owner. And some of that won't start until 3 years from now. And one of my questions was, for instance, can they get an SBA loan, a Small Business Administration loan? Like, do you know what their credit score is? If their credit score is below, say, 750, they may have trouble getting a loan. And he was like, I don't know. He reached out to the team member. It was over 800. Like it was excellent. I'm like, great. As long as he doesn't go out and buy a boat, you'll probably be fine. But that's the thing. Like, what are their financial resources like now? Because they may need to put money into the business beyond their buying in. So thinking about all those moving parts, Emily, what comes to mind?
Well, and it's another question, but I don't know if I'm veering too far off topic, and you tell me if I am. Selling off part of the business, the portfolio of clients that I was referring to, that really is kind of her specialty, would that be an option, and what would that look like? But again, I don't want to take up too much time if that's like a whole other area.
It would be a whole other area. And, so far we've been talking about this mostly as an equity transaction where they're buying a portion of the business. There are other options like doing, if this were non-services business, more of an asset purchase where they're buying a certain asset. I guess you could look at the client cash flow as a possibility there. We actually have someone on the call today who might be able to help with that. Not in the call, but that is Jon Morris, who will be our next guest. So it might be worth digging in a bit with someone who's focusing in that area. And I know Jon actually has already chimed in. He mentioned, has used phantom equity over the years, and importantly, with a 3 or 4 year vesting schedule. That's an important point. You don't want someone to suddenly become full owner or full owner of everything in their shares, only for them to quit, kind of thing. And sometimes people will build in, it's at least a year before they have anything, and then there and so forth. But kudos on thinking through all various potential implications rather than just jumping in.
Thank you.
Well, Emily, thank you for joining today. Good luck. Let me know how things go, and reach out to Jon afterwards. Good luck.
Thank you.
So speaking of Jon, next up is Jon Morris. Let me bring you in here and go ahead and unmute yourself. So Jon, thank you for sponsoring today.
Thanks for having me, Karl. Excited to be here and excited to meet everyone virtually.
Yes. So, here's the intro and a preview, by the way, for everyone listening. Coming up, we're going to talk more about remote culture, specifically, how do you make sure that when your team is remote, or if your team is remote, you build a strong culture and retain employees and team members. And finally, we'll look at employee incentives, things like bonuses, commissions, and other motivational tools to help you get more of what you want from your team. But first, we have some advice, some financial advice from our sponsor. Today's event is sponsored by Ramsay Innovations, led by Jon Morris, who'll be speaking shortly. Here's a bit of background. After growing his agency from 1 to 200 people and then selling it, Jon launched Ramsay Innovations to provide fractional CFO services. What's unique about their approach is they build out a world-class financial infrastructure at a fraction of the cost it would take you to do it yourself. And like me, Ramsay works solely with agencies. They do this by providing tech-enabled, insight-driven finance and strategic planning built for marketing agencies by marketing agency people. Jon, I understand you have several tips today to help people as they're growing their agency, whether it's growing to 200 people or something otherwise. What are the tips you'd like to share? And then I understand there's a special offer at the end.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So a couple things. One, my last agency was Rise Interactive. Rise was on the Inc. 500, 5000 list for 9 years in a row, the Deloitte Technology list, the Crane's Fast 50. We grew fairly substantially. And a huge part of the reason why was, if you think about it, every single one of the people on this Zoom owns an agency. Mm-hmm. You all have massive amounts of competition, and all we have is time and money. And we were very focused on how we spent that time and money to ensure that we were getting the right return off of all of the investments we made.
Yes.
And a comment I always have is that every single one of us has a strategic plan, whether we know it or not. It is what we choose to spend our money and our time on. I'll give you an example. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had a sales pitch and I'm talking to an agency owner, and he was telling me how important growth is to his organization. And so I asked one simple question: what % of your revenue do you spend on sales and marketing? And the answer was 0. And
I am guessing they are not going to grow as fast as they want without allocating anything to make it happen.
Exactly. And so that's what I explained. Is I was like, look, you might think growth is important to you, but your actions are showing you growth is not important to you. And so, we had a great conversation about remote versus hybrid versus in person. If a remote culture is important to you, but getting the culture is right, well, then you need to invest in making the culture work.
Yes.
Which gets me
not treating remote people as second-class citizens.
Yep. So the idea is that everyone has a strategic plan. It's what we spend our money on. So the point, though, is we can make our strategic plan better by adding purpose and thought behind it. And I'm going to recommend 4 specific goals every single one of you should have on an annual basis. So the first one is a revenue goal. As Karl said, some people might want to grow to, a 200+ person organization. Some people might want to grow at a slower rate. But the point is that you need to make sure that you are thinking about the revenue you want to hit relative to the revenue you're currently doing and how you're going to grow that. The second one is your profit goal, which is, yes, you want to grow the top line, but you also need to make sure that you're doing that while achieving whatever your bottom line goal is. Just so you know, a typical agency makes 20% in EBITDA or profit relative to their revenue. But you might want to invest more in the business and have a lower number. You might want to have less infrastructure and have a higher number. So those are the things that you think about. The third one is a cash goal. And a lot of people separate out cash versus profit and don't think of them as, think of them as the same thing. But you might take money out to put in your pocket. You might invest in capital infrastructure. But by building a cash surplus, you can not only protect yourself for a rainy day, whenever the next COVID hits, which hopefully doesn't happen for, another 100 years or so. Or, I see all the time investment opportunities that just randomly show up. And if you build a cash reserve, you can act on those. If you don't build a cash reserve, you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And then the last goal is what I call an infrastructure goal. And the infrastructure goal is basically what I want you to do every January is to be able to say that your business is better than it was 12 months ago, the previous January, or whatever your first month of the fiscal year is. And I highly recommend at the most, you identify 4 things that you're going to invest in. It might be investing in that remote culture. It might be investing in your recruiting infrastructure. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, I just promised my client delivery team that I'm no longer going to sell because we don't have enough capacity to take that on. Well, that tells me that you need to invest in your recruiting infrastructure so that you don't have that problem. Yes. Or it might be you don't have enough leads, so you have to invest in your sales and marketing. Or it might be that you have gaps in your service offering and you have to invest in those services. But the idea is that you get 4 at the most.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. The next thing that I recommend is that you budget all of these things and you go through an exercise where every quarter you revisit how are you doing against your goals, and you make sure that you adjust your expenses based on where you are at that moment in time. And then the last suggestion I have, which is very similar to the first comment of everyone has a strategic plan whether they know it or not, is it can't be a goal unless you put budget against it. So I know a lot of people do EOS and they do their annual planning and they say, okay, these are my goals for the year. But if you don't get those goals into the budget, they're more of a wish list than they are a goal. I'm going to tell you 2 realities of the agency world. Reality number 1 is that your employees are going to want to get paid more. They're going to want to work less hours. Reality number 2 is that your clients are going to want to pay less, have you work more, and talk to more senior people. And the reason why I bring that up is there is an inflation to your business and a pricing pressure to your business that occurs every year. So if you think about it, before you get any of your goals into your budget, you're going to have to give raises and promotions. If you have real estate, you're probably having an increase in your rent. And so just to break even in profit, you're going to have to increase your revenue to absorb that cost. Once you absorb that cost, then you can start thinking about how are you going to get these goals into your budget. And those are my 4 points that I wanted to get across today.
A key theme here is that magical thinking or wishful thinking is not going to do it. You need to think strategically, take action. And importantly, I mean, especially right now, as we're thinking about the end of Q1, for everyone listening, if the idea of reviewing how you did, goal versus actual, or even creating that in the first place sounds miserable and the opposite of exciting, get someone to do it for you, whether it's your existing accountant whether it's another team member or a fractional CFO service like Ramsay, someone needs to do it, and you'll be glad that you did. So, Jon, I understand you have an offer for everyone who's listening, and Kate will be sharing the link in chat. I understand that you will conduct a free financial assessment to evaluate a range of things about each agency. And I'm not going to list all, it looks like it's 10 things. I'm surprised you're including all of this at no charge. To me, it seems like a very good deal. Reviewing data integrity on your P&L statement, chart of accounts organization, accounts receivable health, and several more things, 10 things altogether. We have a link, we've shared it in chat. Is there anything, Jon, that you'd add about that free assessment that people can get if they reach out thanks to the Sakas & Company Agency Office Hours?
Yeah, I mean, look, the main thing is I want to make sure that all of you are in a financial position to thrive.
Yes.
And, as Karl said, somebody has to do this, and it's worth investing in to make sure you do it right. Hopefully this free assessment will give you a guide of where you stand against benchmarks, against other people, things that you need to build upon, and making sure that you at least have the right financial infrastructure to take your agency to the next level.
Awesome. Jon, thank you so much for sharing today and for sponsoring. And if people want to learn more, they can check out the link in chat if they're on live, or if you're watching the recording, you can get to that in the video description. Jon, thank you very much.
Thank you, Karl.
Next up, we have a question from Farzana in London. If you want to unmute yourself and come on video, thank you. Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I guess my question is about building culture and a sense of belonging. We're a relatively small team of 25, and we actually started working fully remote a couple of years prior to COVID. I love working remote. Don't ever want to go back to the office, kicking and screaming, not going to happen. But I do realize that there is an issue in terms of the team are very productive, and but I think we're facing issues in terms of retention, and when people in the exit interviews, they can't quite put their finger on the reason why they're leaving. We've got interesting clients, we do good work. I think especially sort of younger generations in particular, I think they miss going to the office and having that sort of sense of belonging. And so I just wanted to pick your brains. We don't do anything in terms of going, once a year or twice a year and meeting up, because we're also based in different countries, from India to France to Spain to Nigeria and the UK. So we have a bit of an issue about meeting up as well. But yeah, over to you. Would love some ideas.
I would still consider, I know it's going to be expensive to fly everyone in, and there are complications, especially with COVID. I would weigh making that investment in it maybe once a year. You might not be getting people together every quarter or 3 times or twice a year, but once a year would be really powerful. And there's a question of, what is the central or central-ish location?
London.
Conveniently, you don't have to go anywhere, and certainly plenty of flight options and things like that. And you probably want to consider a fairly extended period of time. If it's happening once, sounds like this might be like meet for a week. Basically from a client perspective, you're not bringing in new clients, like you're sorting out some degree of coverage for that week, however you're going to rotate that. But it's really powerful to get people together. And for people who've done this or done something similar or team retreats, please share in chat. How do you approach retreats? My approach is, did one retreat in 2019, none in 2020, of course, did one in late 2021. And the plan for this year is to do 2. We're doing one in April coming up in a couple of weeks, and then another in August amidst scheduling kinds of things. So I would recommend running the numbers on what that would look like. I realize it's going to be quite expensive, but you also may offset it against not paying for offices in all the locations. So I would take a look at that. It can be really impactful. do spend a lot of time planning on how that might be successful. Like if you're bringing 25 people together for a week, including international travel, you know, so you could be spending 100 staff hours, like not one person spending 100 hours, but like between the leadership team and the operations team sorting through logistics and things like that, you could easily spend 100 hours planning. But if you think about it, 25 people times 40 hours for the week, that's even higher. And then if you include the travel time, right, because people are going to be, you know, traveling, all that. So, you know, beyond that, you know, what can you do when you're not getting the, or well, first, what's your reaction to that?
I mean, I've been toying with the idea for quite a long time, and we have internally been discussing, should we all meet up in London, or should we actually meet up somewhere else where some, you know, other people are based, so it feels a bit more inclusive. So we have been toying with that idea, and but I just have to sort of bite the bullet and do it. I like the idea personally, because I do think there's something missing when we are all working remotely, and you know, I think it's a nice perk as well for people to be able to travel and go, and that's the whole, I think it reinforces our whole idea of working in different countries, is our ability every year to choose a different city where one of the teams located and go and visit. So I think that probably will be quite nice. But then outside of that is what I'm also.
What are you doing all other 51 weeks a year?
So we're just not very good at,
do you, at 25 people, you're approaching the point when many agencies would hire someone in charge of human resources or culture. Usually I see that more around 30, definitely at 40, you know, you need that. Do you have someone who would be interested, and they're probably in a more operationsy role, in spending part of their time around team culture? So that would be things like, go ahead.
Yeah, we do actually have a full-time person who's our talent director, and they also look after our sort of purpose, like our charity giving side.
Yes.
But what we're beginning to do is actually looking for somebody more senior, because actually I think that he's very good in many ways, but we want to sort of try and elevate our approach to talent from bog standard recruitment to culture, and I think that's where one has to be quite intentional. And you know, and so we're looking for a more senior person to support us on the culture side.
I'm really glad to hear that, because without that intentionality, without looking for ways to over communicate to the team. You know, I was talking earlier about it's really easy to be a bad manager. It's hard to be a good manager. It's easy to be a bad manager in person, but as soon as you add a remote component, like you really need to up level. I tied to that, in addition to expanding your investment on the, you know, talent side of culture, I would take a look at options around leadership and management training. You know, a good introductory training is offered by Manager Tools, Manager-Tools. I've completed their in-person program several years ago. My colleague Kate did their remote option recently. They offer it in different time zones, so you know there may be some options for that. It's currently $900 US. It's a great deal for 8 hours of content. There's also a program, Life Labs, with their Leader Lab program, that offers a bit more of a modular approach. I've done some of their training through one of my clients. There are others too. There's even, I took one years ago through SkillPath, called, it was like Introduction to Being a First-Time Supervisor. And actually the company I was at the time is like, why do you want to take this? You're not managing any people. I'm like, but I want to, like, better to do it now rather than later and learn all of that on the job. So I would look at investing in leadership and management training. I'm actually creating that as my next virtual program, inspired by my book, Made to Lead. It's the Agency Leadership Intensive. That one specifically is for agency owners and number twos, so it wouldn't be open to everyone on your team, but in general, looking for opportunities to help people up level as leaders will make a big difference.
And Carl, these three organizations you mentioned, Manager Tools, Life Labs, and Skill Path, are they specifically for leadership positions within remote teams, or is it agnostic in terms of style of working?
They are agnostic.
Okay.
And actually, Kate, if you don't mind sharing, did you have a sense when you recently did the Manager Tools Effective Manager Conference, any sense on remote versus non-remote in your cohort?
Yeah, so in the cohort, it was about split, but the advice that was given during each of the trainings was geared both ways. So they tailor your advice. Here's how you do it if you're in person, but if you're remote, do it like this. For instance, stopping by an employee's desk to talk to them about their day. Maybe you use a Slack channel. Maybe you have their phone number and you text them so they know it's not work related. So it was a good amount of split between both remote and virtual. And in person.
Got it.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm seeing some other comments in chat. Let's see, looking at some notes. Aaron, you mentioned you've got 70 people all remote. That you do have an office in New York to entertain clients. That is a valuable piece of, right, clients want to come visit. They don't, I mean, often clients want you to visit them, but hey, we can go to a fun location, see a show. Oh yes, we have business to do, kind of thing, a little bit of a boondoggle. Like the idea of coffee talks where people sign up and they do a virtual coffee hangout one-on-one to get to know each other personally, no work talk allowed. Virtual game nights, things like that. You know, a lot of it is you want to customize it for what matches your culture. You know, I worked as an employee at 2 agencies. One was very social, like happy hours almost every week. I worked at another agency where I don't think we ever had a happy hour, or, you know, maybe it was like one social event every 6 months kind of thing. So part of it is finding what is right for your culture. I don't recommend the approach. A client had a team member, one of the managers, take everyone on a bottomless brunch mimosa tour. Not sure I'd recommend that. There are some liability issues, but you know, kind of thing. Aaron mentioned, yeah, those social outlets, huge impact, and indeed seeing some, you know, helpful retention impacts, and all that. Also, the idea of creating employee resource groups, ERGs. You know, at 25 people. You know, you're on the cusp of that, but it may make sense. Some people will have different Slack channels for different topics, you know, so photography or outdoors or pets or things like that. I think as you're preparing to hire the new senior culture person, your ideal match is likely someone who has done this at more than one company. You know, ideally, they've done it at a couple or several, and for some of that impacts your ability to afford them. But ideally, this is not the first time they've done it. Ideally, they can say, you know, we did this here, we did this here. Here's the mix and match of what would work best here at our agency. What are your next steps from here? But before, you know, we'll move on to our final question today. But Farzana, what are your next steps?
Well, I think it's, I really love everyone's feedback on the chat. So I love the idea of doing those sort of mandatory virtual sort of one-on-one coffees where they're not allowed to talk about work. I think it's a great idea. Yeah. I'm going to probably start putting, you know, sort of marrying intent with actionality and putting some budget with this sort of annual retreat meetup. And really start focusing on finding a brilliant person to come and help us build sort of culture and a sense of belonging, and ideally someone who's obviously done it before successfully in other organizations in remote environments. But yeah, thank you so much to everybody for all of your input. Really useful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. Well, our next question and our final question for today is from Michelle in Michigan. Michelle, if you want to unmute yourself and join. Thank you for joining Agency Office Hours today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
So you'd reached out, and I guess the theme is around employee incentives, specifically how to approach employee incentives, bonuses, commissions, things like that. If you could please elaborate a bit and let's answer your question.
Sure. Well, we had an incentive program that we were doing last year, and it was really all around AGI numbers, and I got the feeling that a lot of the employees felt like how can they contribute? Because it's not their problem if we don't sell something, if they're a
Right.
designer or a developer or whatever. So I changed it up this year and I'm doing quarterly goals for each employee. So then they would then have a goal that they would need to work on outside of hours it's like a growth goal.
Yeah.
And then if they achieve that, they get a bonus. And then also we have a company goal. So if we hit our numbers, then they would get a quarterly goal based on that. So I just wanted to hear your feedback on that. And, am I giving away too much versus not enough? Or the thing regarding the commissions are, how can that be structured? I know how we're doing it. I just don't know if that's best practice.
So in general, if we think about incentives, people tend to do the things they have the incentive to do. And that could be positive or negative. A key thing when it comes to agency incentives is whatever the incentives are, people need to, not only do they need to connect to what people have control over, like for instance, a salesperson getting a commission for their efforts to sell and getting results, they get paid a percentage of that. Not just is it going to be connected to what they have control over, they also need to perceive they're having control over it. To your point about, oh, well, whatever happens to AGI, agency gross income, basically the revenue coming in for, services minus any sort of pass-through kind of situation. If someone's like, well, I'm not part of that, they may not feel like they have control. So say AGI is down, an employee who's primarily a subject matter expert who's busy billing as much as they can, they could have exceeded their billable target, but it's not their fault that AGI is down. On the other hand, a salesperson might resent that other people are getting a portion that they think should be part of theirs. So whatever incentives you do, keep in mind that fairness is both partly reality, but also perception is reality. A client, for instance, had created a highly complex bonus structure calculation process. Like I saw their spreadsheet and whoa, there were so many inputs and all these calculations. And the thing is, from an objective standpoint, it was pretty fair. It was tying what people got primarily to what the individual was doing, as well as what was going on in terms of the agency as a whole, right? It was a mix of individual and team-wide. Problem is, the system was so complicated and so opaque, it was a black box, people didn't think it was fair. And they ultimately switched to a more straightforward approach. And by the way, if people have bonuses, commissions, other structures, please share in chat what you do. I see Jon has already shared some recommendations. I like to think of it in terms of a profit sharing pool. Now, depending on your financial advisor, they may say, don't call it profit sharing because there may, you're implying that they're getting a share of profits as an owner and not an owner. But if you think of it as a pool of profits, and you may call it something else, usually people will identify a percentage of profits that would get shared with the team. So for instance, it might be 20% of your profits. So that's 20% of all the profits. It's not 20% of your revenue, right? So like, okay, 20, kind of narrow it down. Of that pool, it then gets shared with team members. So for some agencies, that profit sharing pool, it could be 10%, it could be 20%. The most I've seen is 50%, which is really high. Almost no one is doing that. But say you're doing 20%. You have a couple options. One is to divide it among members of the leadership team, right? In the sense that they have higher level responsibilities than the frontline employees. They should get a share for the complicatedness of their work. That's an option. Another option is the profit sharing pool is split across all of the employees. And in that case, there's of course a question of how to allocate it. For some agencies, everyone gets the same amount. That's an option. In general, I'm more of a fan of allocating it on a prorated basis based on their salary, in the sense that if you've got a team member who's getting 150,000 versus 75,000, you've basically said the person getting 150, they're delivering double the value of someone getting paid 75. Now, that's not talking about their worth as a human or what have you, but financially in the business, person making double the salary is in theory double the impact. So you can prorate it based on that. So the person at 150 is getting double whatever that percentage amount is as the person getting 75. What's your reaction so far on what we've discussed?
I think, I'm pretty close to what you're saying. So
Okay.
I think I'm on track. So I think that it's all good, because my previous option was everybody got the same exact, no matter what.
Yeah.
Like, if we hit our financial goals, boom, everybody got the same. And the way that I'm doing it now is so we developed our strategic plan, and then based on all the things that I want done within that strategic plan, I divvied it out, right? And said, okay, so we want to get this done, and who's the right person to do that? Okay, you're getting this quarterly or goal, and so forth. And then based on, well, to me, like the value to the company for this goal is this. And so there may be some people that are getting $250 bonus, and some may be like a few thousand, it just depends on what the quarterly goal is. My issue with the annual goals is that people forget about them, and if it's like, oh yeah, well, you might get the annual goal. Well, yeah, but that's like 12 months from now, and I don't really care right now. Like, I feel like I need to keep on them, because even a quarterly goal, before you know it, it's the third month and they haven't started it. So I want to make sure that I'm staying, on everything.
A key thing with that basically would be, if you have an annual goal, break it into quarterly chunks so people are managing the quarterly thing that will move toward the annual. One other thing to keep in mind, and unfortunately we're out of time today, but my closing suggestion would be, and this is for you, Michelle, and for everyone who is listening, before you change a bonus structure, if you've got an existing structure, share the new form in draft format with your team to generally get their feedback. They don't frame it, they don't have veto power on the new approach, but get some feedback from them so they feel like they have some buy-in rather than you're just mandating something. They may notice some issues that hadn't come to mind before. It's a lot easier to change it when it's a draft than if this is the final thing, and then suddenly you realize there are these gaps, but you've told people this is the plan. So I would get some team input, but importantly, they need to know they don't get to veto it. You're looking for observations so that you can fine tune it. So that's my parting note to keep in mind as you move forward.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing today. Let me know how things go. Well, that concludes Agency Office Hours Q&A with Sakas and Company. I'm Karl Sakas, agency consultant, coach, and trainer. We meet every second Tuesday of the month, all year long, taking your questions live. If you have a question you'd like to ask in a future event, you'll submit it ahead of time. We'll let you know. We're trying to build a mix of different questions. We'll let you know beforehand if you're on the list, and then you'll get some free consulting advice. If you'd like further help, including potential one-on-one work or other support, reach out to me at sakasandcompany.com. My colleague Kate has shared some links there if you'd like to learn more. Look forward to seeing you again next month or in the next video. And in the meantime, good luck out there. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.